Ice Cube, the voice that helped shape American culture, the spirit behind Straight Outta Compton, and the unforgettable soul of Friday, is far more than a legendary artist. He is a man forged in fire, molded by loss, strengthened by heartbreak, and defined by a resilience so powerful it reshaped music, film, and the very identity of a generation. Born on June 15, 1969 in Westmont, a corner of South Central Los Angeles where daylight felt thin and the nights echoed with sirens, Cube grew up in a small home protected by the exhausted but determined hands of his parents, Hosea and Doris, who stretched every dollar to keep danger from crossing their doorstep, even as fear crept through the cracks of the neighborhood they lived in. A neighborhood where sidewalks broke before the children did, and every family learned to survive in silence. In that fragile household, surrounded by the quiet discipline of two hard-working parents and the presence of his brother Clyde, his childhood carried a weight he couldn't yet understand. One shaped by the legacy of relatives like Del the Funky Homo Sapien and Cam, whose creativity flowed through their bloodline like an inheritance waiting to be awakened. But all the music in the world could not shield him from the moment that shattered his innocence forever, the tragic death of his sister Beverly when he was only 12, a blow so sudden, so unjust, so violently unfair that it tore childhood straight out of his hands and left a silence humming through the walls of his home like a ghost that refused to leave. He remembered the way his mother's knees buckled when she heard the news, how she covered her face as if to block out a world too cruel to look at, and the way his father stared at the floor in a hollow grief that left Ice Cube standing alone in the doorway, hands shoved deep into his pockets, watching a funeral car drive away with the last piece of his childhood inside. After Beverly's death, their home grew colder, not physically but spiritually, as if grief itself sat in the living room each night, eating with them, sleeping with them, changing the rhythm of their lives. His mother stared out of the window as though waiting for something that would never return. His father spoke less and less, until his silence became a second language, and young Cube walked through the house with careful steps, afraid to disturb the memory floating in every corner. Outside, South Central's cracked streets and warm asphalt became part of his emotional landscape, reminders that safety was always temporary and peace was something borrowed, not owned. At school he felt disconnected, carrying an invisible weight that made laughter from classmates sound like it belonged to a world he no longer stood in. The quiet ache of Beverly's absence shaped every decision he made, every sunrise he woke up to, every night he lay awake wondering how someone so full of life could vanish in a moment without reason. Yet, somewhere between grief and the suffocating quiet of his home, a spark lit inside him, a determination, thin at first, then fiercely consuming, to find a place where his pain could be released, where the noise inside his chest could finally escape. Around age 14, almost by accident, he discovered the escape that would carry him for the rest of his life. Writing, a friend dared him to type a few lines, and what came out surprised him. Words filled with anger, loss, honesty, and truth. Words that felt like they had been pounding on the inside of his ribs for years, waiting for a way out. From that night on, he wrote hunched over a small desk under a dim bulb, spilling verses that captured the sorrow in his house, the rhythm of the streets, the fear, the heartache, the violence, and the twisted beauty of the world outside his window. Writing wasn't a hobby, it was survival. And late at night, when the rest of the world was quiet, Ice Cube found the one place where his grief didn't swallow him whole, the blank page. It listened, it healed, it told him he wasn't alone. And years later he would say that no teacher, no mentor, no classroom taught him how to write. Only pain did, only loss did, only the fire inside him did. And it was that fire that would go on to change the world. The only place where fear softened, where memories finally found shape, and where the ache of a young boy from South Central could speak without trembling, was the quiet corner of his room where writing first saved him. And from that dim sanctuary, lit by nothing but a cheap bulb, a wounded heart, and a determination larger than his years, a voice began to rise, a voice that the world would one day recognize as Ice Cube. And as the silence left behind by Beverly's death settled deeper into his life, the world began pulling him forward with a force he didn't feel ready for, demanding a strength he never asked to develop, shaped by pain he never chose. Each morning he boarded a bus from South Central to Woodland Hills, resting his forehead against the cold window as Los Angeles blurred past him. Two worlds unfolding on opposite sides of one fragile city, one world bruised and unpredictable, the other polished and unfamiliar. Taft High School, with its clean halls, bright laughter, and students who glanced at him with curiosity or caution, felt like a dream he had wandered into accidentally, and through every corridor he walked carrying a grief stitched tightly beneath his skin, a grief no one saw in the way he moved from classroom to classroom as though the air around him was heavier than anyone else's. Some days the weight of living between a house full of ghosts and a school that held him at arm's length felt unbearable, yet he kept walking, guided by a silent promise he made the day he lost Beverly, that he would move forward even when he had no idea how. By 1987, searching for stability, he chose a different path, enrolling at the Phoenix Institute of Technology to study architectural drafting, where he excelled with quiet precision, turning lines and angles into order. But even the clean geometry of blueprints couldn't mend the fractures inside him. He later admitted that staring at those architectural plans made him realize that no house he designed could ever rebuild the pieces of his own life, and after a year, he stepped away, abandoning the safe path with a clarity born not of rebellion, but of truth. He needed a space where everything he couldn't say aloud could breathe, where his shadows weren't flaws but stories waiting for a voice. Music, raw and unfiltered, gave him that space. Around this time, he poured himself into writing again, not for fame, but survival. Teaming up with his cousin Sir Jinx, he formed CIA, performing at backyard parties where Dr. Dre kept the night alive behind turntables. Parties lit only by porch bulbs and the pounding pulse of borrowed speakers. Worlds louder, freer, and more alive than the grief-soaked quiet of his home. Somewhere in that chaos, something inside him unlocked. Dre felt it instantly, not just the rhythm in Cube's delivery, but the weight and precision of every word he crafted. At just 16, Ice Cube sold Boys in the Hood to Eazy-E, and though fame was still distant, the air around him shifted. Someone beyond his neighborhood had finally looked at him and seen not a wounded kid from South Central, but a voice worth hearing, a truth worth carrying. Still, the climb ahead was anything but gentle. Rap music was dismissed by many, judged before a single verse was heard, and Cube came from a place too often misunderstood, feared, or mocked. Some wrote him off before he opened his mouth, assuming someone from his streets had nothing meaningful to say, but he had already survived a loss that rewired his entire world, and after that, rejection felt small. Deep into the night, he kept writing, letting South Central guide him, the hum of streetlights, the distant sirens, the weight of memory pressing against his ribs, and with each verse he built something sturdier than any blueprint he once studied, a foundation made of truth, grief, rage, resilience, and an unshakable belief that his voice would not be denied. From that foundation, his rise didn't just begin, it became inevitable. Success didn't arrive gently, it crashed into his life like a storm he wasn't prepared to weather, loud, blinding, spinning him into an industry that demanded strength built from every scar he carried. Before the world even knew his name, that storm began quietly in late-night gatherings behind neighborhood houses, where Dre first heard him not as a teenager testing rhymes, but as a voice that cut through noise with honesty too sharp to ignore. Dre later said he knew in seconds that Ice Cube had something special, something he couldn't let slip away. When Cube stepped into NWA, he didn't walk in as a background figure. He became the sharpest pen in the room, the narrator of the streets America preferred not to hear about, the voice of neighborhoods the country labeled before listening. Straight Outta Compton exploded in 1988, forcing the nation to confront realities it had long silenced: police violence, poverty, systemic neglect. And Cube's lyrics weren't crafted to entertain, they were crafted to confront. His pen was the blade that carved NWA's identity, but behind the scenes, the paperwork told a crueler truth. Contracts designed in shadows, promises packaged as praise, money flowing everywhere except toward the one writing the words fueling the group's rise. While the world echoed his lyrics, Ice Cube earned only $32,000 for an album selling in the millions. The fire he gave NWA, being smothered by signatures that did not carry his name. He had survived grief, poverty, and silence, but betrayal from those he trusted became another wound he would have to rise from. And rise he did. Walking away in 1989 felt like stepping blindly into a darkness without a map, without a flashlight, without a single promise that something better was waiting on the other side. Yet Ice Cube chose dignity over comfort, truth over convenience, and self-respect over guaranteed success. Fully aware that honesty often demands a loneliness only the strongest spirits can survive, the early 90s would prove to the world why he had been the backbone of NWA all along. Because when America's Most Wanted dropped in 1990, it didn't just chart. It hit like a national siren tearing through a country still unsure how to process a young black man speaking raw truth with no filter. And when Death Certificate followed in 1991, Cube didn't soften, didn't retreat. He doubled down, delivering fearless verses that exposed systems, challenged narratives, and spoke in a language America wasn't ready to hear. Then came The Predator in 1992, an album selling over 2 million copies and becoming the only project of the year to top both the pop and R&B charts. Proof that at just 23 years old, Ice Cube wasn't just part of the national conversation, he was shaping it. But greatness, real greatness, is heavy, and Cube carried it like a man trying to balance the weight of 3 lives on shoulders already bruised by grief. He worked 16-hour days, lived on tour buses, lost his voice between shows, and carried expectations that could break seasoned performers twice his age. And as new sounds rolled in, G-Funk, East Coast Renaissance, The Next Generation, the earthquakes he had caused slowly softened into tremors, and few pains cut deeper than watching a new era walk through the same door you shattered without even acknowledging the crack you made. Years later, Cube admitted that this shift taught him a truth that pierces every pioneer sooner or later. Being first rarely earns you applause, just endurance. Being a trailblazer means standing tall, even when the spotlight drifts toward those who came after you. Hollywood, for Ice Cube, wasn't a sanctuary. It was another battleground. In 1991, director John Singleton saw something raw in Cube's eyes, something that no acting class could teach, something carved from grief and sharpened by truth. And Boys and the Hood turned him from rapper trying to act into a performer Hollywood could no longer dismiss. Still, the doors weren't wide open. He walked into casting rooms where people saw a stereotype before they saw a man, a rapper before an actor, a musician before a creative mind with the power to shift culture. So he worked, studied scripts until dawn, rewrote scenes to make them real, learned the camera the way he once learned to survive pain. Then came Friday in 1995, a film he wrote and starred in, transforming a $3.5 million budget into a $28 million cultural phenomenon, birthing lines, characters, and moments that would be quoted for decades. Through Cube Vision, he produced classics. Barbershop with over $75 million. Are We There Yet? Nearing $100 million. 21. Jump Street launching a new comedy era. But the higher Cube climbed, the thinner the air became. Meetings stretched past midnight, budgets ballooned into numbers that felt like holding live dynamite, and the fear that one flop could erase years of trust hung over every decision like a shadow he couldn't outrun. Success didn't lighten the load, it multiplied the stakes. Then came 2017, and the Big Three, his boldest, wildest, most doubted idea yet. A professional sports league built from nothing but grit, belief, and the stubbornness that had carried him since South Central days. Critics called it naive, investors called it risky, and the industry called it impossible. But Cube built it anyway. Arenas, athletes, contracts, networks, lawsuits, payrolls, every decision holding zeros capable of shaking a man to his core. The league burned through millions before making a dollar. And there were sleepless nights where Cube stared at numbers knowing that failure here wouldn't just cost money, it would cost legacy. Yet he pushed forward the same way he pushed through those long morning bus rides out of South Central, the same way he pushed through studio nights that lasted longer than sunrise, the same way he pushed through every door that tried to close on him. And in the end, one truth rose above all the films, albums, and businesses he built. Ice Cube didn't climb from nothing to a net worth surpassing $150 million because the world made room for him. He climbed because he refused to stop carving space out of stone, turning pain into power, power into work, work into legacy, a legacy destined to outlive him. But time tests even the strongest men, and in the last few years, Cube learned that some storms don't roar, they whisper. In 2021, he quietly stepped away from the film Oh Hell No, turning down a role reportedly worth $9 million because he refused to take the mandated vaccine. He didn't protest, didn't debate, didn't try to convince anyone of anything. He simply said no and accepted the consequences. In Hollywood, $9 million isn't just a salary. It's momentum, protection, leverage, a shield against becoming irrelevant. Yet Cube walked away, knowing choices made in silence often echo the longest. Behind closed doors, he later admitted the loss stung deeper than the money. It stung in that place where principle collides with consequence, and neither side walks away clean. But the sting didn't stop with a paycheck. What followed was something subtler, colder. The sense that Hollywood, the place he had poured 3 decades of sweat and reinvention into, was shifting forward without him. Not punishing him, not rejecting him, just moving on. And sometimes that is the crueler cut. He watched younger names fill the spaces he once occupied, watched new rules settle into the industry, like dust, watched opportunities appear in rooms where his name was no longer the first mentioned. He once joked, softly but with a heaviness he didn't bother hiding, "Hollywood changes like weather. If you don't keep your coat close, you'll wake up in a season you didn't expect." For Ice Cube, winter arrived early, cold, quiet, and without warning. And for a man who had built entire doors where none existed, realizing the world no longer checked to see if he was standing on the other side was a pain sharper than any headline. Still, even in that long silent season of shifting fame and slow-moving uncertainty, Ice Cube carried himself with the same unbreakable resolve that had been forged in the cracked concrete of South Central long before crowds ever chanted his name. There were days when the phone stayed still on the counter, untouched and unmoving. Days when a script he believed in slipped quietly into someone else's hands. Days when a studio meeting ended not with rejection, but with polite smiles that carried the weight of unspoken doubts. Days when the whisper, "Your time has passed," felt louder, heavier, and more cutting than applause ever did. Yet Ice Cube knew that whisper well. He'd met it before, stared it down before, pushed against it before, because that whisper first tried to bury him at 19 when he walked away from NWA with nothing but truth and backbone in his hands. It returned again when critics mocked his early solo work, calling it too raw, too militant, too bold. It returned again when he dared to act and they dismissed him as just another rapper pretending. It returned again when he created the Big Three and was told no one would ever take it seriously. That whisper echoed through every chapter of his life, and each time it arrived, he shut it out the same way, by proving that a man built from storms doesn't drown in them. And even though age adds gravity to every disappointment, even though being told you may not be needed anymore at 56 cuts with a deeper, more private ache, he faced it the way he faced every storm before, with the quiet, steady endurance of a man who refuses to shrink, a man who has outgrown validation and learned to stand even when the world pretends not to see him. Some wounds don't bleed, they sit in the chest like a stone, turning every night into a silent negotiation with yourself about which chapters are ending and which ones you are brave enough to begin. But if Ice Cube's life has taught him anything, it's that he never measured his worth by the doors others opened for him. He measured it by the ones he carved himself when no one handed him a key. Losing a $9 million role didn't break him. Hollywood drifting forward without checking if he was still standing on the other side of the door didn't silence him. Those moments didn't weaken him, they clarified him. Today, he moves not defeated, but defined, with the calm certainty of a man who has survived enough storms to stop fearing the clouds. He tours, creates, leads the Big Three, raises his family, and speaks with the grounded confidence of a cultural architect who knows he is already immortal in the story of American music and film. And if the world has grown louder with opinions, he has grown quieter with purpose, because in the end, his journey was never about chasing the spotlight. It was about maintaining the strength to stand steady when the spotlight turns away. And that strength, more than fame, more than money, more than roles, is the legacy he knows time cannot erase. His career bruised him, stretched him, challenged him, and reshaped him. But his family was the grace that steadied every storm. Long before the world knew his name, Ice Cube met the woman who would outlast every spotlight he ever stood under. Kimberly Woodruff didn't fall for him at first sight. He wasn't yet the man the world would one day celebrate, but something in the way she moved, the quiet confidence in her walk, the softness in her presence, made him pause in a way he wasn't used to. She moved through the world with a grace that quieted noise, and Cube found himself searching for her in crowded hallways, looking for her face long before she ever turned toward him. Months later, when life softened the edges around them both, she finally saw him the way he had always seen her. By the time they married in 1992, he was standing at the edge of fame, 1 foot in the world he came from, and 1 foot in the world he was building. But they were still just two young souls counting grocery money under the yellow glow of kitchen lights, sharing late-night dinners on a sagging couch that squeaked every time they shifted their weight. Their refrigerator hummed through the night. The cracked plates clinked softly during homemade meals, and the thin apartment walls carried every whispered dream they were too afraid to say loudly. Nothing was glamorous, but everything was real, and without realizing it, they were laying the quiet, sturdy groundwork that would one day carry the weight of extraordinary fame. 5 children, and a lifetime of sacrifice. But every foundation, no matter how strong, is eventually tested. Hollywood offers bright lights, but it demands shadows in return. And as Ice Cube's star climbed higher, the cost at home deepened. Kimberly ate dinners alone under a flickering kitchen lamp, her fork scraping softly against a plate that never had a second hand reaching for it. She tucked 5 children into bed, On nights when Ice Cube's schedule blurred into airports, sound stages, and cold hotel rooms, whispering reassurance she barely believed, he missed birthdays, he missed first steps, he missed school plays. He pieced together memories through grainy photographs, texts, and rushed phone calls squeezed between takes. And then came the night that carved itself permanently into their marriage, their son's birthday. The candles burned low, wax pooling like melted hope. The cake leaned slightly, as if even it was waiting for someone who wasn't coming. Kimberly checked the door again and again, chin lifting each time, breath catching each time, hope dimming a little more each time. When their son finally asked, "Is Dad coming?" she knelt, brushed his hair back, and whispered, "He's trying," but Ice Cube didn't make it home. Hours later, he stood in the hallway, keys still in his hand, listening to the silence pressing against the walls like judgment. Through a cracked door, he saw Kimberly at the table, head bowed, balloons drooping behind her like exhausted promises. On the couch, their son slept clutching the wrapped gift he never got to give. And in that breathless, breaking moment, Ice Cube felt something inside him fracture. A realization sharp as shattered glass. He had gained the world, but was losing the time that mattered most. What saved them was never an apology, never some dramatic declaration, never a perfectly crafted speech. It was the quiet, unseen bravery of simply staying, even on days when staying hurt more than leaving ever could. The bravery of showing up in the doorway when you're exhausted. The bravery of holding a hand you once let go of too many times. The bravery of loving quietly after years of living loudly. And that is the kind of bravery Ice Cube finally chose. He began coming home differently, moving through the house like a man relearning a language he once spoke fluently, walking slower, softer, with presence that wrapped itself around his family like a long overdue embrace, sitting on the edge of the bed long after midnight, listening to the tiny breaths of his children drifting through cracked doors, wondering how many nights he had already missed and how many he could not afford to lose again. And Kimberly noticed it, every piece of it. The way he lingered in the hallway studying the shapes of their home as if he feared forgetting them. The way his shoulders loosened when he hugged the kids a second longer. The apology in the silence more sincere than any words could ever be. And she, who had endured every lonely dinner, every birthday candle melting into wax without him, softened in the places she once built walls, choosing not resentment but grace, leaning in instead of stepping back. Their 5 children, O'Shea Jr., Daryl, Karima, Deja, and Sharif, unknowingly stitched their parents back together with every laugh, every argument, every small hand reaching for both of them at once. And in 2015, when O'Shea Jr. stepped onto the screen in Straight Outta Compton portraying the father whose footsteps he spent a lifetime studying, the entire family sat together in a dark theater, and Ice Cube watched his own childhood unfold before him. The pain, the loss, the fury, the triumph, seen through the eyes of his firstborn, and something in him softened in a way he did not expect, as if seeing his scars through his son's performance finally allowed old wounds to close. In that moment, he wasn't the legend, the icon, the pioneer. He was just a father, a husband, a grandfather, a man whose legacy lived not in charts or box office numbers, but in the faces illuminated by the glow of that movie screen. Today, their home is imperfect in the ways only real homes can be. Voices raised, then quieted, misunderstandings that sting and then melt into forgiveness over late-night whispers. But it is warm, steady, earned, a home held together not by perfection but persistence. Ice Cube often says success never taught him how to love. Family did, and Kimberly, the woman who once walked past him without a second glance, became the compass guiding him through every triumph and heartbreak, the anchor of a love story Hollywood could never fabricate. In a world where marriages burn out faster than opening weekend numbers, theirs burns slow, steady, refusing to dim, even when the winds shift. Their journey is a reminder to every parent fighting to hold a family together, and every couple weathering storms in silence. Love is not forged in perfect years, but in imperfect days survived side by side. And often the greatest victories in a man's life don't happen beneath spotlights, but at a quiet kitchen table with the people who never stopped waiting for him to come home. And as life moved forward, another storm returned from Ice Cube's past. One that fame couldn't soften and time couldn't outrun. The day Eazy-E left the world. Everyone remembers it. The headlines flashing across TV screens, the stunned silence settling over Los Angeles, the disbelief crashing through neighborhoods raised on his voice. He was only 31, far too young to go, far too iconic to lose. To millions, it felt like the end of an era. But to Ice Cube, it was something deeper, more intimate, painfully unfinished. The loss of a brother he never got to forgive. They had once stood shoulder to shoulder in cramped studios full of mismatched chairs, buzzing speakers, and flickering bulbs. Two kids from the margins trying to turn raw sound into something bigger than survival. Fame lifted them, money divided them, pride silenced them, and then life, quiet, cruel, unforgiving, closed a door neither knew was about to lock forever. Before the world crowned them pioneers, they were simply boys with notebooks and borrowed microphones, sharing hunger, hope, and late-night dreams in dusty rooms that smelled of sweat and ambition. Cube never forgot the smell of that first studio, the old carpet curled at the edges, the secondhand equipment that crackled with every beat, the way Easy leaned back with that half-smile nod that meant one thing: keep going, there's something here. Easy believed in him when nobody else did. Easy bought Boys in the Hood when Cube was just 16, giving him a chance that changed everything. For a moment, it felt like destiny was theirs alone to hold. But destiny is fragile. Contracts twisted into chains. Misunderstandings grew teeth. Loyalty became tension. Cube walked away in '89 angry, confused, trying to protect himself, while Easy stayed convinced he'd been betrayed. Silence grew between them, a silence heavy enough to crush any bridge. Then came the call in early 1995, call that stopped Ice Cube cold. Eazy-E was in the hospital. It was serious, very serious, far worse than fans were being told. Complications from AIDS had led to severe pneumonia, a fast, brutal decline, the kind that leaves no space for preparation, no time for reconciliation. Cube felt 8 years slam into him at once. Every argument, every interview, every lyric used as a weapon, every moment he thought, I'll fix this later. He didn't go to the press. He didn't draft a statement. He sat alone for hours, replaying memories he wished he could rewrite, wishing for one more conversation, one more joke, one more chance to say, we were brothers before the world got in the way. And when Easy passed, Cube learned a truth sharper than any diss track ever written: tomorrow is never promised, and silence can become a wound that time refuses to heal. When Cube finally walked through the hospital doors, everything felt painfully, devastatingly wrong. The sterile brightness that washed the walls in a cold glow, the quiet corridors humming with a grief he wasn't ready to recognize, the distant beeping of machines marking time he was quickly running out of. Visitors whispered, nurses moved with practiced urgency, and somewhere behind a door he had been too afraid to open, the boy he once recorded with Until Sunrise was slipping away, fading in real time like a beat cutting out mid-song. And as Cube approached the room, his hand brushing the cold metal handle, he froze because stepping inside meant facing a truth he had spent years avoiding, a truth shaped by pride, silence, and the fragile belief that there would always be more time. So he stared at the floor tiles instead, tracing their lines because keeping his eyes down made it feel less final, less irreversible. And years later he would confess softly, I didn't know what I would have said, but time has no patience for unfinished sentences. And on March 26, 1995, Eazy-E was gone, sudden, sharp, final, and with him went the last fragile chance to repair what had fractured between them, leaving a silence so heavy it settled on Ice Cube like a second skin. Los Angeles mourned loudly, radios crackling with tributes, fans crying in streets, but Cube mourned in silence, carrying regret in a way only men who once loved each other like brothers could understand. At the funeral, buried beneath cameras, crowds, and the thick fog of disbelief, he stood with a weight no headline could capture, his face carved from stone, no public tears, no dramatic gestures, but those close to him said the regret sank into his chest like something that would never fully loosen, because some wounds close, and some simply teach. In the years that followed, Cube spoke of Easy with a tenderness that revealed the truth buried beneath every past tension, not as a rival, not as a business partner, but as the friend who gave him his first real shot, the kid who believed in him before the world did. And maybe that's why the loss cut so deeply, not because they had been great together, but because they had been young together, hopeful together, reckless and brilliant together, believing life would always give them another moment to set things right, not knowing fate would steal that moment long before they were ready. And today, when Ice Cube looks back at the stages he's ruled, the films he's created, the empire he's built from raw willpower and sleepless nights, there is always a quiet shadow standing beside him, the memory of a boy with dark glasses and a high-pitched laugh, a grin that once believed they had forever. And in that shadow lives the lesson Cube carries to this day: make peace while the door is open, because some doors close without warning, and some goodbyes never wait for names to be spoken. Now at 56, Ice Cube stands as a living monument to how far discipline, grit, and unshakable belief can carry a man, his net worth hovering near $160 million. a number impossible to imagine when you remember the cracked sidewalks and flickering streetlights of South Central where he began. Yet every dollar carries the weight of long nights in studio basements, early mornings on film sets, business negotiations stretching into dawn, and a lifetime of choosing ownership over comfort, sovereignty over shortcuts. His real estate alone reads like an atlas of the American dream. His Marina del Rey mansion floats above shimmering canals behind walls of floor-to-ceiling glass, with floating staircases, rooftop fire pits, ocean breezes brushing marble countertops, a private theater where ideas are born in the dark, heated floors that warm tired bones, and balconies overlooking water so still it looks hand-painted at sunrise. Then there's his 8,000 square foot Encino estate, the home he has held for decades, with 7 bedrooms, dual master suites, a discreet recording room tucked into the back wing, a private gym, lush lawns, a basketball court where his sons learn to dribble, a resort-style pool and spa shimmering beneath California skies, all wrapped in tall hedges that keep the world out and peace in, a sanctuary earned through years of fighting to rise above the noise. And if the homes weren't enough to show how far he's climbed, his luxury car collection completes the story. A pristine '64 Chevy Impala lowrider, a Rolls-Royce Ghost detailed to perfection, a Porsche Panamera blending elegance with adrenaline, a Cadillac Escalade for family trips, and custom West Coast rides built like chrome memories of the culture he helped shape, each vehicle more than metal and horsepower, each one a mile marker of a journey no one expected him to survive. Yet Cube's empire is not built on luxury, it is built on vision. Music gave him his doorway, film expanded his reach, producing strengthened his power, and entrepreneurship fortified his legacy. When he co-founded the Big Three Basketball League in 2017, critics scoffed at the idea that a rapper could create a professional sports franchise, but step by step, through negotiations with investors, partnerships with arenas, contracts with retired NBA legends, legal battles, relentless press, and thousands of decisions the public will never see, he built something real, something respected, something profitable, because he understood early on what few artists ever learn: applause fades, trends shift, and fame is not a foundation, it's a shadow. Ownership is the only crown that doesn't slip. And that truth, learned across decades of storms, is why Ice Cube stands today not just as an artist, or actor, or mogul, but as a blueprint of what it means to carve permanence into a world built on temporary applause. But ownership lasts, investments last, vision lasts, and every inch of the life he lives today. From oceanside glass walls that glisten like liquid silver at sunrise to sprawling estates that echo with the laughter of 3 generations, to a garage that gleams like a private museum of dreams, stands as proof that futures built from nothing can grow into legacies designed to outlive the man himself. And now, at home, Ice Cube's life is quieter, fuller, steadier, shaped not by the demands of fame but by the family he built and protected over 3 decades, a family that became the real measure of success long after the last encore faded. He and Kimberly remain the same unbreakable pair they became in 1992, but the rhythm of their world has settled into something gentler, something calmer, something that breathes with gratitude and memory instead of pressure and deadlines. Their children, once small hands tugging at his pant leg, are now grown adults carving their own destinies. O'Shea Jackson Jr., an actor with a rising star, often dropping by for late dinners and arriving with his own child in tow, turning Ice Cube into the kind of grandfather who smiles deeper than fans have ever seen. Daryl working in music and production, carrying the family's creative fire behind the scenes. Karima and Deja choosing private lives far from the camera's glare, and Sharif, the youngest, floating between creative passions and family gatherings with the relaxed confidence of someone raised in a home where discipline and love walked hand in hand. These days, the Ice Cube household isn't defined by chaos, schedule boards, or the frantic buzz of film sets. It's defined by routine, genuine routine, the kind that heals. Mornings beginning with sunlight pouring through wide windows, Kimberly reading quietly in the kitchen, Cube reviewing Big Three updates with a focused calm, and the occasional chorus of all 5 children laughing loudly around the long dining table while the smell of home-cooked food fills the rooms that once held only echoes of ambition. Other days, it's just Cube and Kimberly walking slowly across their property at sunset, talking about the kids, the grandbaby, the small joys of aging side by side, and the indescribable relief of reaching a place in life where family means more than any premiere ever could. Holidays are bigger now, warmer than ever, grandbaby toys scattered across the living room, cousins catching up, Kimberly cooking dishes everyone waits for all year, and Cube moving through the house with the slow, content rhythm of a man who has finally learned to enjoy the life he built instead of simply surviving it. He still works, still tours, still produces, still leads Big Three, but when he steps through the door of his home, he leaves the public world outside. Here, he is not a rapper, not a mogul, not an icon. Here, he is a husband whose favorite place is still the sofa beside his wife, a father who gives advice over backyard barbecues, a grandfather who bends down slower but smiles wider than he ever did in his youth. And in this stage of life, that role, the steady anchor of 3 generations, has become the one he cherishes most. Philanthropy weaves through his life not as a headline, but as quiet intention. He rarely publicizes it, but those close to him know he has invested in programs that open doors for young creators and underserved communities, because he believes that opportunity is the currency that saved him. And he gives it away, not as charity but as access, mentorship, possibility. His message is simple and unwavering: build doors for others, because not everyone is born in a place where doors exist. That truth runs through everything he touches, from business choices to quiet acts of generosity. Even now, decades of success behind him and comfort all around him, Ice Cube moves with the steady confidence of a man who earned every inch of his peace. He's still on the road, still building, still showing up at Lakers and Dodgers games with the same quiet fire that carried him from a small bedroom desk to global stages. Big Three continues to rise under his guidance, and when he steps on any stage, whether a roaring arena or an intimate venue, the crowd feels the unmistakable charge of someone who remembers exactly what it was like to fight for a single microphone. Time has touched him, yes, but instead of softening him, it has refined him, sharpening his clarity, steadying his voice, settling his spirit in a way that says he has nothing left to prove to the world because he's already proven everything to himself. And so, as we close this chapter of Ice Cube's journey, what lingers is not just a lesson but a feeling, an emotional recognition that every life, no matter how public or private, carries its storms and victories, its weight and its wonder, its losses and its resurrection moments. Maybe it's the perseverance, maybe it's the humanity, maybe it's the quiet dignity of a man who keeps rising even when the world shifts beneath his feet. And if something in his story stayed with you, one moment, one memory, one glimpse of the man behind the legend, we invite you to share it in the comments below. If tonight's journey touched you, even in the faintest corner of your heart, feel free to tap the like button and stay connected with our community. And from all of us here at Golden American Stars, we send you a blessing stitched with sincerity. May your home be filled with peace, your heart be steady with health, your days touched with happiness, and your life so overflowing with abundance that every sunrise feels like God whispering, "Here is another chance." May you walk forward protected, strengthened, and surrounded by every quiet miracle your spirit has been hoping for.